Rain slams sideways off the Atlantic and hammers the length of Terminal 4. Pull back. 10,000 souls before dawn. Nobody looking up. Nobody looking at anybody. Titan, a Boeing Cessna 87 at Gate 17. Wet skin. Beacon dark. Closer. A woman climbing a jit with 3 gold stripes on her sleeve, and a secret that will end a man's life in 22 seconds. Closer still. Silver hair, combed straight back. 30 years in the left seat. He turns around. He looks at her exactly once. There's been a mistake. There's no mistake, Captain. Sweetheart, I've crossed that ocean 400 times. You've crossed a checklist. And he doesn't stop there. He walks into that cabin. He takes the microphone off the wall. He points a thick finger down the aisle at her. We sit here until she stops playing pilot and gets off my airplane. He waits for them to laugh. They don't laugh. 200 phones come up at once, and he screams, "Who are you?" She reaches into her jacket. Frank Decker had 30 years in the cockpit, but 400 crossings of the Atlantic. Seniority number 4 out of 6,000 pilots. And he had exactly 22 seconds left of the life he thought he had. He didn't know that, because the woman standing in his cockpit doorway that gray Tuesday morning at Kennedy, the tall, black woman in the first officer's uniform, the one he was about to call a diversity hire in a voice loud enough for the galley to hear. She wasn't a first officer. She owned the airline. The rain came in sideways that morning. That was the first thing Maya Caldwell noticed stepping off the crew shuttle. Not the cold, the angle. 5:40 in the morning. Nobody looked at her. That was the point. 80 people passed her between the shuttle and the crew door, and not one glanced twice at the woman in the Meridian Airways uniform with 3 gold stripes on her shoulder. She was nobody. For 6 more months she wanted very badly to be nobody. The scanner blinked green. Caldwell M. First officer. B787, green light, every time. Because the badge was real, the rating was real. The 4,200 hours were real. Only one thing about Maya Caldwell was a lie, and it wasn't printed anywhere on that card. The cockpit door was open. He was already in the left seat, silver hair combed straight back, a uniform pressed to a crease that could open mail. "You're late," he said, not looking up. She checked her watch. 6 of 1. Report time 6. Report time is when I say the airplane is ready. She stood in the doorway. Here is a thing about the flight deck of a wide-body airliner that nobody outside one understands. It is a closet, 2 seats, a center pedestal, a door that locks from the inside. There is nowhere to go in a cockpit. That is not an accident. That is the design. First Officer Caldwell. She put out her hand. "Good morning." Frank Decker turned around, and Maya watched it happen. She watched a man's face do the whole arithmetic in half a second. Eyes to her skin, eyes to her stripes, eyes back to her skin. She'd seen it before, in hotel lobbies, in crew rooms in 9 cities. She had never seen it this fast. "No," Decker said. Her hand stayed out. "I'm sorry? There's been a mistake." "There's no mistake, Captain. I was assigned at 4:10 this morning." He stood. 6'2", built like a man who had been 6'2" since he was 17 and had never once been asked to explain himself. He put a hand on the back of the right seat. Her seat. "You're going to walk back down that jet bridge. You're going to tell scheduling to send me somebody qualified, and I'll wait." Maya lowered her hand, slowly. 4,200 hours. Transatlantic certified. Recurrent 3 months ago. All green. Hours, yes. Decker smiled. It wasn't a smile. It was what a face does when it wants you to know it isn't afraid of you. "You know what I don't care about? Hours. Because I know how hours get handed out in this company these days." Rain hit the windscreen. Ran. "I don't fly with diversity hires," Frank Decker said. "Get off my airplane." Here is what did not happen next. She did not shout, and she did not tell him who she was, which would have taken 4 words, which would have ended it in 4 seconds. Because if she said it now, she'd learn exactly one thing, that Frank Decker was a bigot. She already knew that. It was on the first page of a file she'd read at 2 in the morning in a hotel room in Phoenix. What she didn't know, what her father had spent one of his last hours trying to tell her, was who had let him be one for 19 years. So she stood very still, and she made herself small in a way that cost her something she would never entirely get back. "I need you to say something," she said. "What?" "Clearly, so there's no confusion later." He frowned. "Are you refusing to fly with me?" And something old in Frank Decker heard the shape of that question. But he was Frank Decker, and Frank Decker had never once lost. "Yes, I'm refusing." "On what grounds?" 30 years of knowing who has it," he said, "and who doesn't." Maya nodded. "Once. Thank you." She turned around and walked out, and Decker sat back down in the left seat and thought, God, that was easy. 8 months earlier, in a hospital room in Westchester, Robert Caldwell told his daughter the truth about the company he built. He was 71. He had been a big man once. Now he took up half a bed. "Do you know why I always flew the left seat?" His voice was thin. Wind through a screen door. "Because you were the captain." "No. Anybody can be the captain. That's a bid sheet." "Then why?" "Because the left seat is where the blame lives." She waited. Something goes wrong at 36,000 feet, and the investigators pull the tape, and they look for one name. They don't ask who was tired. They don't ask who got outranked. They don't ask who was too scared to speak. The monitor did what monitors do. They ask who was in the left seat. She took his hand. It was cold and enormous and light as paper. "I'm leaving you 50%, he said, and something else. "You're gonna hate me for it." "What?" "The truth." He closed his eyes. "Meridian is rotten." The word sat in the room, not in the numbers. The numbers are clean. The rot is in the rooms, the crew lounges, the way certain men talk when they think the door is shut. "Dad, I let it happen." His eyes stayed closed. "I was building, always building, and every year I didn't look, it got a little deeper." He opened his eyes. They were still his. That was the terrible part. Don't run it from a tower. Don't read the reports. The reports are written by the people the reports are about. Then how? Get on the runway. He squeezed her hand. It was almost nothing. And look up. 3 days later, he was gone. She didn't take the chief executive's chair. Gerald Ashford, 67, her father's partner since before she could ride a bicycle, sat across from her on the 40th floor. "The market wants a name. You're the name. Not yet. File me as owner, as interim. Whatever keeps the lawyers quiet." She turned from the window. "But don't put my face anywhere." Ashford set his pen down. "You're going to fly the line." It wasn't a question. 6 months. Under what name? She turned around. "Mine." He stared, and then he laughed. Once, a dry, startled bark. Because it was perfect. The airline had been Caldwell Air until 1998, then the rebrand. Then 27 years of a name that meant nothing to anybody. Caldwell was just a name. Like Miller. Like Johnson. Like nothing at all. So, for 6 months, First Officer M. Caldwell flew the line. She learned things. Not from spreadsheets. From the smell of jet fuel at 5 in the morning. From the sound a crew lounge makes when a certain kind of man walks in, which is the sound of 11 conversations dropping half step. She learned the good captains ask your name in the first 90 seconds and then use it. Some of them never ask at all. And one night in Phoenix, with an access code only 5 people in the company possessed, she learned about a filing cabinet. 11 complaints, 19 years. Not one denied, every single one closed, which is worse. Denied means somebody read it. Closed means it went into a drawer, and the drawer was shut. A gate agent in 2007, a flight attendant in 2011, twice. A dispatcher who wrote 4 pages, signed his name, and left the company 9 weeks later. And a first officer named Amanda Reyes, 26 years old, who filed 4 complaints in 18 months. Maya searched the directory for her. Amanda Reyes no longer worked at Meridian Airways. She sat on the edge of a hotel bed in the dark, and she did not sleep. Maya stood at the window at A17 with her phone against her ear. 2 rings. "Maya, you should be pushing back. The captain of Flight 970 just refused to fly with me." Silence. Long enough that she heard him set something down. "Say that again." "Frank Decker. Seniority number 4. He told me he doesn't fly with diversity hires." "To you." He doesn't know who I am, Gerald. She heard his breathing change. She'd known Gerald Ashford 38 years and heard him angry perhaps twice. This was the third. I'm calling airport police. I'm ending that man's career before your coffee goes cold. No, Maya. He humiliated a first officer, she said, and that stopped him. Because that was 6 months in a single sentence. If he'd said it to a 26-year-old named Amanda Reyes, would you be on this phone? Nothing. No, Ashford said finally. There would have been a report, and it would have been closed 11 times, 19 years. I've read everyone. The rain came harder against the glass. So we don't fix this with a phone call. Frank Decker isn't the disease. He's the fever, and I need to see how high it goes before anybody hands me an aspirin. A long quiet. What do you want? He wants to delay this flight. She watched the 7H87 sit out there, patient and wet. Let him, and send me Kowalski. As support. No. Then as what? She watched the seat slide down the glass in long, crooked lines. As a witness. Ray Kowalski was 50, had a bad knee, and was holding a lukewarm bagel when his phone rang. The screen said Ace HF4G, which in 11 years had never once happened. Terminal 4, Gates A17. Right now. Kowalski dropped the bagel in a trash can. And he ran. His knee lit up like a road flare somewhere near the air train, and he kept running. Because there were some things in Gerald Ashford's voice he had never heard in his life. And while he ran, Ashford told him 3 things. He nearly went down on the escalator. Sandra Holt was 45 and had been flight attendant for 22 of them. She stood in the forward galley with a coffee pot in her hand. The cockpit door was open. It was 6 feet away. She had walked past it 400 times and never once measured the distance, and she would spend the rest of her life knowing it exactly. She heard everything. She heard hours. She heard brochure. She heard in the flat tone of a man ordering a sandwich, I don't fly with diversity hires. And she heard the other woman's voice stay level. That was the part that got into her bones. Because Sandra Holt had a voice like that once, at 23. Before she learned what happened to women who used it, she looked down at the coffee pot, and she said nothing. She would think about that moment for the rest of her life. Not the shouting, not the video, not the courtroom. Just this, a coffee pot, an open door, and 6 feet of galley floor she did not cross. Maya walked back up the jet bridge at 6:41. Because here is what she understood, walking up that ribbed metal tube. She could end it quietly, 1 badge, 1 sentence. Decker gone by lunch, a discreet retirement for health reasons, and 100 men exactly like him would stay exactly where they were. And they would learn precisely 1 lesson. Don't say it out loud. Or she could give Frank Decker rope. All of it, and let him climb. She stepped into the forward. Sandra Holt looked up, looked at Maya, and looked immediately, instantly at the floor. Maya saw it, and filed it. She isn't surprised, Maya thought. God, she isn't even surprised. She opened the cockpit door. I told you, I'm the assigned first officer of Flight 917. I'm not leaving. He came out of the seat so fast the coffee went over the center pedestal. Get out. No. I will have security. Then call them. Ask them to remove a qualified, current-rested pilot from an aircraft she is legally assigned to operate. He was breathing hard. And tell them why. You think you're clever. I think I'm on the crew manifest. I have 30 years. You've mentioned. You don't lecture me about safety. In my cockpit. It isn't your cockpit. And that did it. Because Frank Decker had built an entire human being out of 4 words, and a woman he'd known 11 minutes had just taken it apart in 3. Something behind his eyes came off its hinges. Fine. You want an explanation? Let's give everybody an explanation. He pushed past her, shoulder into her shoulder, and walked into the cabin. And Maya Caldwell thought one clear thought, no, then, oh God, there are children on this airplane. Then, much quieter and much worse. Yes. Let him. He took the handset off the bulkhead, Captain. Sit down, Sandra. She sat down. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. 100 faces turned forward. We have a delay. And I want each of you to understand exactly why. Somewhere in business class, a laptop closed. This airline, Decker said, and he raised his arm and he pointed one thick finger at a black woman in the cockpit doorway, has decided that politics is more important than your safety. The cabin went still. Not quiet. Still. There is a difference, and every person on that airplane felt it in the skin of their arms. They have assigned an unqualified affirmative action hire to the right seat of my aircraft. I have refused to fly with her, and she will not leave. A woman in 3C put a hand over her mouth. So we are going to sit at this gate, Decker said, and he grinned, until she stops playing pilot and walks off my airplane. He lowered the handset and waited, because he knew this part. This was where the businessmen sighed and turned on her, and the pressure did the work for him. It always had. What he got was silence, and then the phones won first, then four, then the entire forward cabin at once. That soft insect rustle of 200 people lifting the same small black rectangle, all pointing it at him. Decker's grin flickered. Lenses, every one of them a lens. Turn those off, he said. Not one person turned anything off. Maya took a single step forward. Captain Decker, you've just violated Federal Aviation Regulation 91. 13. You've made a discriminatory public statement to 276 paying passengers. One beat. And you've done it on camera. You think I care about policies? I think you should. I am the policy. His voice cracked wide open. 30 years came out of him at once. I've been here since before you could drive. Who are you? He was shouting. Who are you? Except a door banked open at the front of the airplane. Ray Kowalski came through the L1 door, soaking wet. Decker turned and saw him, and relief came off Decker's face like light off water. Ray, he actually laughed. Ray, thank God. Tell this girl to get her bag and get off my. Ray Kowalski walked past him. He did not slow. He walked past Frank Decker the way you walk past a coat rack, and he stopped in front of Maya Caldwell. And in a cabin so silent that 200 phone microphones caught every syllable, he said, "Ma'am, I came as fast as I could." Nothing happened for 1 full second, ma'am, to her. What? Decker said. Maya didn't look at him. She looked at Kowalski. He doesn't know, does he? Kowalski shook his head. No, ma'am, I don't believe he does. She reached into the inside pocket of her jacket. She drew out a lanyard. She'd carried it every day for 6 months, flat against her ribs, under the wool. She had never once taken it out. Matte black, a thin platinum edge. There were exactly 5 of them in the entire company. Ray Kowalski, who had seen one before, took a step back. You asked who I am, Maya said. 276 people stopped breathing. My name is Maya Caldwell. My father was Robert Caldwell. He founded this airline in 1995. Decker's mouth opened. He died 8 months ago. He left me 51%. Not a sound. I am the owner and chief executive officer of Meridian Airways. The color went out of Frank Decker's face so completely that a woman in row 2 would later describe it on television as like somebody switched him off. And you, Maya said, are fired. He didn't fall down. Everybody expected him to fall down. He stood in the aisle and swayed once, like a building deciding. That's a lie, he whispered. He turned to Kowalski, almost begging. Ray, tell her to stop. Who is she? Some auditor. Captain Decker, Ray Kowalski said. And his voice was steady and nearly kind, and it was the worst thing Frank Decker had ever heard. That's Miss Caldwell. She's my boss. She's your boss. He paused. She's everybody's boss. Decker put a hand on the back of seat 1A. He needed it. Because the faces were coming into focus. And they had not been faces 30 seconds ago. They had been an audience. The crowd he'd been playing to his entire life. They weren't looking at him like passengers. They were looking at him like a car accident. Mrs. Caldwell, his voice came out wrong, small, wet. It's cockpit talk. Old man, first officer. It's a hazing thing. It's a joke. A joke, Maya repeated. She hadn't raised her voice once in 28 minutes. Somehow that was worse than shouting. You told 276 people a qualified pilot was unfit because of the color of her skin. As a joke. His mouth worked. 30 years, he said. 30 years and my record is spotless. And that That was the thing that finally moved something in Maya Caldwell's face. "Your record is spotless," she said, "because people covered for you." Her eyes moved past Decker to the galley where Sandra Holtz sat with her eyes on the carpet. 11 people wrote it down. 11 files were closed, and every person who closed one thought that's the chief pilot's problem. And the chief pilot thought it was the unions. She looked back at Decker. "You are not spotless, Frank. You are unrecorded." She held his eyes. "There is a difference, and I am about to correct it." She stepped around him and picked up the handset. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Maya Caldwell. I am a rated 787 pilot. I am also the owner of this airline." She looked up at the ceiling of the cabin. "I want to apologize to you personally. Not on behalf of a corporation. Personally." She started to lower the handset, then raised it again. "One more thing." The cabin waited. "If you recorded any of this," Maya Caldwell said, "please don't delete it." The applause started around row 11. It moved forward through that airplane like weather. The last part was the hardest. 4 flight attendants stood in a knot by the galley. "Miss Caldwell, I'm so sorry. We had no idea he would. Didn't you?" Sandra stopped. "You weren't surprised?" "Not once." "You didn't look shocked, Sandra." She waited. "You looked tired." Sandra looked at the carpet. "He's difficult. Everybody knows. You put your head down and get through the trip." "How many trips have you flown with Frank Decker?" 23. "He's the captain." It burst out of the youngest one. "Her name tag," said Anaya. "We're supposed to listen to the captain." "Not when the order is illegal," Maya said. The girl flinched. "And not when the order is to stand in a galley and watch a crew member to be told she isn't human enough to sit in a seat she earned." Nobody breathed. "There's a chain of command. Yes, and there's also a duty to act. They teach you both. In the same building, in the same week." And she saw exactly what her father had been trying to tell her, dying with the window gray. It is never only the loud ones. The loud ones cannot survive alone. A Frank Decker requires a Sandra Holt. He requires 11 closed files and 100 people who decided one small morning at a time that not participating was the same thing as not being responsible. Culture doesn't change when you remove the loudest man in the room. It changes when the room stops accepting silence as an alibi. Director Kowalski, collect their badges. Sandra Holt's head came up. The forward cabin crew is relieved of duty. Pending a full ethics review. Nia made a sound. "We didn't do anything," she said. And Maya Caldwell, who would turn that sentence over for months and build an entire company policy on top of it before the year was out, looked at her and said, "I know." At 4:20 that afternoon, Frank Decker sat on a plastic bench in baggage claim, no badge, no coat. He couldn't get back through security for either. He looked up at the television, bolted 12 feet above his head. Muted, captions running, and there was his own face. Frozen, arm extended. They were running it on a loop. He dialed his wife. 25 years. She had answered every call he'd ever made to her, from 9 countries at every hour there is. It rang once. "Eleanor, listen, I need you to come get me. I saw it." Frank Decker stopped. Her voice was not angry. That was the thing. He'd prepared for angry. He had built the whole car ride around a woman who would be angry and then be finished being angry. Eleanor's voice was flat and calm, and he had never heard it in his life. "It's out of context. I watched all 9 minutes, Frank. Do you know what our daughter said to me?" He stopped. She sold at noon. Frank so hard I couldn't understand her for 2 minutes. She asked me if I knew, if I'd known the whole time and never told her. And I sat in our kitchen and I could not answer my own child. Because I had to think about it. Something went out of his chest. "I need a ride," he said. His voice had gotten very small. "I don't have a coat. Take a taxi. Don't come home tonight. There's a news van across from our driveway." "Where am I supposed to go?" "Anywhere." She was quiet a second, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked, once, right in the middle. "I stood in front of a mirror for an hour today, Frank, trying to work out what a woman looks like after 25 years of not asking her husband any questions." The line clicked. At 9:07 that morning, 276 passengers reboarded Flight 910. They filed past a woman who stood at the cockpit door and shook every single hand. She flew it herself, left seat. The 787 lifted off runway 22R at 9:48 into a low gray ceiling. It broke through the top of it at 4,100 feet. And above the clouds, where it always is whether or not anybody underneath is it, the sun was up. It had been up the whole time. Maya Caldwell leveled the wings and turned the nose toward the ocean. "Get on the runway," he'd said, "and look up." She'd been on the runway 6 months. She had finally looked up, and what was waiting for her, though the file wouldn't cross her desk for another 9 days, was a stack of fuel receipts, and 31 falsified load sheets, and a 31-year-old first officer named Derek Holloway, who had felt an airplane come up light under his hands over the North Atlantic in the middle of the night, and had been told by his captain that he had imagined it. Frank Decker was not finished. In 3 days, he was going to sue her for $60 million, and in doing so, he was going to make the worst mistake of his life, which was this. He was going to make Maya Caldwell look under the hood. The lawsuit arrived on a Friday, not by email. A man walked into the lobby at 4405 Lexington Avenue at 8:41 in the morning, wearing a basketball jacket over a shirt that had seen better days, and he said the name Caldwell to a security guard who'd been on the job 11 days. Emmett Doyle came down himself, 61 years old. He had been Robert Caldwell's lawyer for 19 years and Maya's 8 months, and in all that time he had never once run in a public place. He walked very fast. He read the caption standing under a chandelier that cost more than his first house. Decker, Frank T. Intif v. Mergeden Airways, Injik and Maya R. Caldwell, individually. Damages sought 60,000. Maya was in the simulator. This was the thing that drove the board out of its collective mind. 8 months in. A lawsuit walking through her lobby. And the chief executive was in a windowless box in Queens, flying a single-engine approach into Denver in a night crosswind. 2 hours, every Friday, non-negotiable, because a rating decays. Because you do not get to be a pilot on the letterhead and not in the airplane. She came to 11 missed calls. The conference room on 40 was all glass. Somebody chose that in 1998 when everything was going up and nobody imagined a day like this one. "Read it to me," Maya said, still in her flight suit. "Wrongful termination, defamation, emotional distress." Doyle took off his glasses. "And a fourth cause of action I've never seen pleaded this way. Fraudulent inducement." Meaning what? Meaning his lawyer intends to argue that you entrapped him. The room went quiet. "He called me a diversity hire." He did, to 276 people. He did. There is video. "There's a great deal of video," Doyle said, which brings me to the second problem. He turned a page. He has retained Clifford Pryor. Gerald Ashford made a sound like something dying under a porch. Clifford Pryor was 64, corner office at 40 Wall Street. A reputation that entered a room 11 seconds before he did. He had made 4 major carriers understand that the fastest way to make him go away was to write a number on a slip of paper and slide it across a table. He had built a boat with the second one. "He'll try this in the press," Doyle said. "He knows he can't win in a courtroom. He doesn't have to. Explain. Because a lawsuit is a story, Maya. Right now, our story is bigot gets fired. We are winning that 90-10 in every household in this country." He folded his hands. "Pryor will write a different one. Billionaire heiress goes undercover to destroy a working man's life. Nobody spoke. 30-year captain, 2 daughters, a mortgage. Fired on the spot, on camera, no hearing, by the owner of the company, who was in disguise." He looked up. "You want to know how that plays in a jury pool in Queens? 2 daughters. And Maya hated it, in a specific and physical way, low in her stomach. Because her first reaction to the phrase 2 daughters was to wonder how old they were, which should not matter, which does not matter. A man does not become innocent because he made people. Except she was singing about her own father, walking her around the wing of a rented Cessna at 11 years old, with his hand on the back of her neck. Somebody taught Frank Decker's daughters to ride bicycles, but somebody held the back of a seat and let go. Stop it. He earned every inch of this, and you can be sorry about it and still be right. She did not yet know it would cost her 3 months of sleep. Ted Garner did not telephone first. 55 years old, built like a fire hydrant with strong opinions, 11 years as the regional representative of the Pilots Association. He believed 3 things with a purity you could almost admire. The captain is God. The union is the church. Management is the devil. He came through the executive floor doors at 10 in the morning, carrying a briefcase he did not need, because there was nothing in it. He slammed it on the reception desk anyway, because Ted Garner learned in 1994 that a slammed briefcase gets you a meeting. Maya came out in a charcoal suit with her father's watch on her wrist, a $40 Timex. He'd never worn anything else on 3 continents to 2 White House dinners. Garner was shouting at a 26-year-old assistant, Priya, who had done nothing on this earth to deserve it. Mr. Garner. He turned, he looked her up and down, and Maya watched a second man in 8 days perform the same brutal little calculation. She's young, she's a woman, she's black, I can take her. You fired a 30-year captain without a hearing. You know what Article 14 is? Yes. Then you know I can shut this airline down. You can't. You want to test that? I don't want to test anything, Maya said. I want you to lower your voice. Because you're frightening my assistant, and she isn't the person you're angry at. He came into the office. She let him talk 4 minutes. Due process, the collective bargaining agreement, quoted from memory and slightly wrong. Trial by video, the erosion of cockpit authority. He used the phrase these days 11 times. Because a man like Ted Garner has a speech, and you cannot reason with him until the speech comes out. It is a physical process, like a sneeze. When he stopped, she opened a drawer. She put a phone on the desk. She pressed play. They have assigned an unqualified affirmative action hire to the right seat of my aircraft. She swiped. Row 4, somebody's shaking hand, until she stops playing pilot and walks off my airplane. She swiped again. Row 1. Very close. The finger extended. Ted Garner's face did not go pale, it went tight. The way a face goes when a man is doing arithmetic he cannot stop doing. That's out of context. There are 9 angles. He was concerned about safety. He never asked me a single question, Maya said. And that killed it. Because Garner opened his mouth and there was nothing to argue with. In 28 minutes, Frank Decker had not asked her name. Not her hours, not her rating. Not one question a man concerned about safety would have asked in the first 90 seconds. He had looked at her once, and he had been finished. Garner's back. The chair creaked. He's got a pension, he said. Quieter. I know. 30 years he's got a wife. I know what he has. He looked at his hands. And for one unguarded second, Maya saw something in this fire hydrant of a man she had not expected. Exhaustion. Do you know what I do all day? I defend people. Some of them deserve it. He stopped. Some of them you hold your nose. Then why hold it? Because the day I start choosing who deserves it, Ted Garner said, is the day management picks the next one. And in 20 years, there's nobody left to call. He stood. He got as far as the door and stopped with his hand on the frame and did not turn around. My daughter flies regional. 6 years in the right seat. Maya waited. She never told me half of what happens to her out there. He opened the door. I'll review the tapes. For 4 days, Maya Caldwell was a hero. Then Clifford Pryor went on television. Gray suit, white hair, a grandfather's face, and a voice like a man reading a bedtime story. I'd like to talk about a 58-year-old man who has flown 400 safe crossings of the Atlantic with your families sitting behind him. He let it sit. Frank Decker said something ugly. He knows it. He will answer for it. He leaned toward the camera, but he said it to a woman who was pretending to be someone else, who owned the company, who had already read his personnel file, who could have stopped it with one sentence. He lowered his voice, which was worth $1,100 an hour. And who chose to walk back onto that airplane and let him keep talking. He sat back. Folks, that's not an accident. That's a trap. Maya watched it from a hotel room in Chicago with the sound low and dinner going cold. And the floor went out from under her stomach. 'Cause he was not lying. I let him. I could have stopped it, and I let him, and there were 276 people on that airplane, and one of them was a boy, maybe 9, around row 31. He heard all of it. Did I use a 9-year-old to make a point about corporate culture? You wanted the rope. You used that exact word. You thought it in the jetway, with the rain on the roof. Because otherwise nothing changes. Because that's what you tell yourself at 3 in the morning. Because it's true. 11 files, 19 years. And if I'd flashed that badge in the cockpit, he'd be in Boca by Thanksgiving, with a pension and a cake and a card everybody signed. And 276 people would have gone to London on time. She sat on the edge of a hotel bed, with her hands between her knees. 38 years old. Owner of an airline, and she had never in her life felt so much like a person guessing. The board met Tuesday. Full attendance, which had happened twice in 8 months. Harold Fenwick spoke first, 71, board member since 2003. He had held her hand at her father's funeral and told her that Robert kept her elementary school report cards in his desk drawer. We have a number. Maya looked up. Pryor reached out through counsel. Informally, Fenwick was looking at the table. $8 million and a mutual non-disparagement agreement. The suit goes away. The story dies inside one news cycle. $8 million. It's cheaper than litigation to a man who told a black pilot to get off his airplane. Maya. His voice was gentle. That was what made it unbearable. You've won. Morally, completely. There is not one person in this country who believes he was right. Then why are we paying him? Because right is not a currency. He opened a folder. The stock is down 11%. Bookings are soft, and Pryor has 18 months of headlines available to him, and they will not say bigot fired. They will say Meridian in court. Until that's the only thing your name means to a stranger. He paused. Your father settled. Maya's head came up. 1997. A hydraulic vendor. He didn't like it either. He paid it and slept fine because he understood the company was larger than the principal. And there it was. Your father would have paid. Maya walked to the window. 40 floors down, Lexington Avenue did what it does. Taxis, steam, a man selling something from a cart to nobody. She thought about a gray window and a machine that beeped and a hand that weighed nothing. Meridian is rotten. The rot is in the rooms. And she understood something she had not understood 8 days ago. Her father had not been describing a business problem. He had been confessing. I let it happen. I was building. And every year I didn't look. It got a little deeper. He had not been asking her to run the company. He had been asking her to do the one thing he never could. She turned around. He settled a dispute about hydraulic actuators, she said. He also told me, 9 days before he died, that this company is rotten in the rooms. She put both hands on the back of her chair, and that he was reason. Gerald Ashford closed his eyes. He built Meridian across 30 years without once paying a man to be quiet about what he was. And I am not going to be the first. Maya? Harold, if we pay Frank Decker $8 million, do you know what every man in this company learns by Friday? That we're pragmatic. They learn the price. She looked around the table. $8 million for one sentence in a cockpit. That doesn't end it. It puts a number on our forehead. Then we litigate, Fenwick said, and we bleed. Then we bleed, Maya. Then we bleed, Harold. She had never raised her voice at a board meeting. She did not raise it now. Not quite. But something got into it that had a floor under it, and every man at that table heard it. And Gerald Ashford put his hand flat on the mahogany and looked down at the grain and smiled. Because it was Robert's voice. It had come out of his daughter's mouth 39 years later in a room he had never sat in. The vote was 5-4. She won by 1. When they had all filed out, Maya sat alone with her hands under the table where nobody could see them shaking. Ashford stayed. "Your father would have taken the 8 million, he said." She laughed. It came out badly, and he'd have been ashamed of himself for 10 years. And then he'd have died, and told his daughter to fix it. He stood. He put a hand on her shoulder. "Once. Fix it. I want a forensic audit of Frank Decker. Of what about him? Everything. 10 years. Flight logs, fuel uplifts, load sheets, expense reports, every dispatch release with his name on it. What am I looking for?" Maya stopped walking. She stood in front of black glass with an entire city hanging in it. "A man does not get comfortable till breaking the social rules," she said quietly. "Unless he's been getting away with breaking the real ones." It took 9 days. On the 9th, at 7:15 in the morning, Emmett Doyle called her at home and did not say hello. He said, "Come in." The table had one folder on it, thin, beige, 40 pages. Doyle had not slept. He stood up too fast, which in 8 months she had never seen him do. "Frank Decker has been stealing fuel." Maya stared at him. "Jet A for 6 years. How do you steal? It's in the airplane. You steal it before it goes in." He turned a page. "The captain has final authority over fuel load, federal regulation. He can add for weather, for holding, for a hunch. Nobody questions a captain who adds fuel. Adding fuel is safe. It's what the good ones do." He slid a receipt across. "So Decker requests 104 tons on a long haul. And the truck delivers 88. Maya did not move. Meridian is billed for 104. Decker signs the ticket. The vendor's agent signs the ticket. And the difference, 16 tons of Jet A at market, is worth about $14,000. They split it, $2.3 million, Doyle said. Since 2019. Maya sat back. And she was doing arithmetic she did not want to be doing, that had started the moment he said 88. "Emmett, if the airplane is billed for 104 tons, and it only has 88. Doyle nodded. "There it is. Here is what nobody outside a cockpit understands. An airplane does not know what it weighs. It has no scale. It is 120 tons of aluminum and wire and kerosene and human beings. And it flies because a computer solves an equation. And the computer solves that equation using numbers a person types into it. Type in the right numbers, and the airplane tells you how fast to go before the wheels leave the ground, how the wing will behave when the air turns rough. Type in the wrong numbers. And the airplane flies exactly the way the computer believes it should, which is not the way it actually will. He falsified the load sheets, Doyle said. His voice had gone flat. He had to. The fuel is on the paperwork, and it isn't in the wings. If he files the truth, somebody notices on arrival. How many? He didn't answer. Emmett, how many? 31 flights. Maya's hands were flat on the table, and she watched them because they appeared to belong to somebody else. Passengers, don't do this to yourself. How many passengers? Doyle looked up. 8,240. He put 8,000 people over an ocean with a flight computer that had been lied to. For $14,000 a leg. That's a used car. He risked 8,000 lives for a used Honda, and every one of them had somebody at an arrival's gate holding a coat, checking the board. Breathe. You are the chief executive of an airline, and you are about to be sick on a conference table. Was anyone hurt? She said. And Doyle's face changed. That was when Maya understood the folder had one more page. Flight 7Z3. April 14th, last year. Kennedy to Heathrow. He laid 2 printouts side by side. Dispatch release, 241.6 tons. Actual, cross-referenced against the vendor's own delivery log, 237.8. Maya did the subtraction before he said it. 3.8 tons in the wrong direction. Entered into the flight management computer of a 77 in the middle of the North Atlantic. He turned to the last page. An incident report. Not filed. Drafted. 3 paragraphs in the flat vocabulary of aviation, which is the most frightening vocabulary on Earth because it never uses an adjective. At approximately 0334Z, subsequent to ETOP's entry point, aircraft encountered severe turbulence. Aircraft response characteristics noted by FO as inconsistent with expected. Autopilot disconnected. Manual recovery initiated by FO altitude deviation, approximately 900 feet. Captain advised FO that event was consistent with normal wake and clear air conditions. No report filed. 900 feet. Past the ETOPS entry point. The invisible line 400 miles from any runway on Earth where an airplane stops having anywhere to go. An aircraft that weighed nearly 4 tons less than its own computer believed, which means the margin, the thin, holy silence margin between an airplane that shakes and an airplane that stops flying along, was not where anybody on that flight deck thought it was. Who was the first officer? Doyle put his finger on a name, the space where a signature belonged and was not. Holloway, Durkee. He's still flying. Miami line. They flew him up on a Tuesday. He came in uniform because nobody had told him what it was about, and a man who doesn't know why the chief executive wants to see Caesars wears the uniform. Maya slid the drafted report across the table. He looked at it for 4 seconds, and she watched a man's entire body change temperature. Where did you get this? You never filed it. No, why? He put both hands flat on the table, as though it might otherwise leave. Because he told me it was normal. It came out in pieces. It always does. We hit it around 340 Zulu. It wasn't the biggest I've been in. He stopped. It's not the size, ma'am. It's how she answered. The airplane. He looked up. You fly the same airframe 1,000 hours. You know what she does when you touch her. Autopilot kicks off, you take the yoke, and there's a weight to it. She resists you. That's how she tells you she's there. He shook his head. That night, she came up light. She came up under my hands like she wanted to go. 900 feet before I understood what my arms were doing. And you told Decker, 3 times, I said. Captain, she's flying light. He never touched the yoke. He watched the altimeter unwind, and he said he stopped. Say it. Derek Holloway looked at the table. He said, Kid, you've never seen real weather. Go get me a coffee. Silence. I wrote the draft in the hotel. Sat on it 2 days. And I was 29 and he was seniority number 4. He rubbed his face hard with both hands. I asked around, quietly. A guy in the crew lounge in Miami laughed at me. He said, You want to write up Frank Decker? Get in line, kid. There's a filing cabinet. So I deleted it. You didn't, Maya said. His head came up. You kept a copy for 18 months on a machine you had no reason to keep it on. Why? And when he answered, his voice broke in the middle of the sentence, and Maya would remember for the rest of her life exactly where it broke. Because I knew, he said. He pressed the heel of his hand against one eye. I knew something was wrong with that airplane. And I let a man with silver hair tell me I imagined it. And I've flown 1,100 hours since then, and every single time I go feet wet over that ocean. He stopped. I checked the numbers twice, every time, like a crazy person. I put my finger on the page like a child reading. He wiped his face fast, with the back of his hand, the way men do when they've decided not to. For 18 months, I thought there was something wrong with me. Maya walked around the table, and the owner of Meridian Airways sat down in the chair beside a 31-year-old first officer from the Miami line and for a while said nothing at all. There is nothing wrong with you, she said. Ma'am, you felt an airplane tell you the truth, and you believed it. She turned to face him. That is not a defect, Derek. That is the entire job. Everything else is procedures. He nodded. He couldn't speak. Will you testify? He nodded again, then hoarse. If I'd filed it. Don't. That's 18 months. That's 11 more of those flights, Derek. She waited until he looked at her. You were 29, outranked by 29 years, and a man in a crew lounge told you there was a filing cabinet. She held his eyes. You are not the reason that cabinet exists. Except at 6:20 that evening, alone with the folder open in front of her, Maya looked at the number. 8,240. And she thought about what she had just said. You are not the reason that cabinet exists. Then who was? 11 closed files, 19 years, the chief pilot who closed them, and the vice president who appointed him, and the man who appointed him. Robert Caldwell had been chief executive officer of this airline for every one of those 19 years. Maya sat very still in the dark. Dad, what did you know, and when, exactly, did you decide not to look? The knock came at 8:40 at night. The floor was empty. The cleaning crew hadn't started. A woman stood at the doorway in a rain-wet coat, holding in a purse with both hands the way you hold something when you don't know what else to do with your hands. 45 years old. 22 of them in the sky. Maya had not seen her since a Tuesday morning, September, in a forward galley with her eyes on the carpet. Mrs. Caldwell, I'm not here to ask for my job back. She had been in the lobby 2 hours. Security had asked her to leave. She'd south outside and stood across Lexington in the rain looking up at 40 floors of lit glass. And then she came back in. Sit down, Sandra. I'd rather stand, ma'am. If I sit down, I'll lose my nerve. So she stood. I've known what Frank Decker was for 6 years. Rain on the window. I flew 23 trips with him. I heard how he talked about the women on his crew. I heard him talk about a first officer in a hotel bar in Denver, and I got up, and I went to my room, and I ordered a club sandwich. Her hands went white on the purse. I heard what he said to you through that door. Every word. I was 6 feet away with a coffee pot in my hand. She stopped. 6 feet. I've measured it. In my own kitchen. It's nothing. It's from the sink to the refrigerator. Why didn't you? Maya said. Because I'm 45 and I have a mortgage and my son's a junior in college. And because I told myself it wasn't my fight. She took a breath, and because I'd seen what happened to the people who made it their fight. What happened to them? Nothing, Sandra said, simply. That's the part nobody warns you about. Nothing happened to them. They filed, and nothing happened. And then they flew with him again 3 months later. And he was polite for exactly 1 trip. She looked at the floor. So you stop filing, and you tell yourself you're being smart, and you go home and you're a good person. You volunteer. You'd step in front of a bus for your kid. Her voice went. And you spent 22 years being 6 feet away. Maya didn't move. There's a girl. 24. Nya. She was on my crew that morning. When you fired us, she said we didn't do anything. I remember. She calls me every week. Sandra's eyes came up. Red furious, not at Maya. She wants me to tell her it wasn't her fault. She is 24 years old, and she's asking a 45-year-old woman to promise her she did nothing wrong. Her chin came up, and I can't, because I taught her that, not with words. She watched me look at the floor, and she learned exactly what I learned when I was 24. From a woman who was 45, 40 floors down, a siren went past and faded. That's what you fired. It isn't 4 people, it's a chain. It's been running 22 years, and I'm a link in it. She set an envelope on the desk. Everything I know. Dates. Trip numbers. What he said and who heard him say it. The names of 4 people who'll deny it and 2 who won't. She stepped back. Use it. I'll say it under oath, and I don't want a thing. She turned to go. Sandra. She stopped. Maya was standing behind her desk. The beige folder was open. The number was face up on the blotter. He was falsifying weight, Maya said. Ma'am, for 6 years, he was selling the fuel and lying to the flight computer about what the airplane weighed. Sandra's hand came up to the door frame. 31 flights, 8,240 people. Maya looked up. And you were in the back of some of them. Sandra had gone completely white. I need you to hear this. Because you came here tonight to tell me you're a coward, and I want you to understand what your science was, actlessly buying. She closed the folder. It was never about a rude man in a cockpit. It never is. She came around the desk. He was untouchable socially. So he got comfortable being untouchable professionally. 11 closed files taught him nobody was ever going to look at anything. She stopped in front of her, and nobody ever did. For 19 years, until he pointed at the wrong woman on the wrong Tuesday. Sandra Holt put her hand over her mouth. My God, I was on some of those flights. Yes. I was in the back of that airplane with a cart. Yes, with people's children. And she came apart. Right there. 45 years old, 22 years in the sky. A woman who had helped evacuate an aircraft on a taxiway in Phoenix in 2011 and never cried about it once. She stood in a doorway on the 40th floor and sobbed into both her hands. Maya Caldwell crossed the room. She would not have predicted it. Not in 8 months. Not on the worst day of her life. But she crossed the 6 feet. She crossed it, and she put her arms around a woman who had not, and she held on. "I know," Maya said. "I'm so sorry. I know." And 40 blocks south, in a corner office with a photograph of a boat named Settlement on the wall, Clifford Pryor was on the telephone. "They'll settle. Trust me, they always settle." He checked his calendar. "Wednesday, my office, 9 sharp." He smiled at the harbor. "Wear the good suit." "Wednesday, 9 in the morning." Frank Decker wore the good suit. Navy. Charcoal tie. Shoes he'd bought 11 years ago and worn maybe a dozen times, because you don't wear those shoes on a Tuesday. He sat in a paneled conference room on the 31st floor, with his feet on the table and a coffee going cold at his elbow. And he looked out at the harbor, and for the first time in 3 weeks he felt like himself, because they always settle. 3 weeks had cost him a great deal. Eleanor's attorney's letter came on a Thursday. She had taken the good pans. 25 years, and she took the pans and left the wedding photographs. His daughters weren't returning calls, and the pilots. The men who'd bought him drinks in 11 cities and called him the Iron Wing. Nothing. Not one call, which told Frank Decker something he declined to examine. "Relax," Clifford Pryor said, coming through the door with white hair and a face like somebody's grandfather in an insurance advertisement. "They're late. They're supposed to be late. It means somebody in a car downstairs is nervous." Pryor sat. "They'll come in at 4. We walk toward the door. They 6. We take 6.5 and everybody goes to lunch. I want 10. You want 10. Pryor smiled the way you smile at a child who has requested a pony. "Frank, do you know what you actually have? 30 years. You have a video." The room went quiet. 140 million people watched you point at a black woman and call her a diversity hire. You don't have 10. You have a nuisance. He folded his hands. And a nuisance is worth precisely what it costs to make it stop. There is a particular sound an elevator makes on the 31st floor of a building on Wall Street. Soft. Expensive. A chime like money clearing its throat. Decker straightened his tie. He arranged his face into the expression he'd settled on in the car, which was dignified regret. The door opened, and Maya Caldwell walked in. White suit, cut clean, no jewelry except a $40 Timex on her left wrist. Chin level. Hands empty except for one thin beige folder. Behind her, Emmett Doyle. Behind Doyle, 4 men in dark windbreakers with 3 yellow letters across the back. Decker's feet came off the table so fast he knocked the coffee over. Pryor stood. His chair went backward into the paneling. "What is this?" Maya didn't answer him. She walked the length of the table. She stopped in front of Frank Decker, and she set the folder down, not hard. She placed it the way you place something you've carried a long way. "This isn't a settlement conference." "What is that?" "Open it." Pryor, fast. "Don't touch it." He opened it. Page 1, a fuel uplift ticket, a vendor's stamp. A signature in the pilot's block. The signature was his. Page 2, the same ticket, from the vendor's own delivery log. The numbers were different. Page 3, a spreadsheet, 11 pages. And at the bottom of the last one, a figure with a dollar sign in front of it. 2,370,400. That's a fuel thing. That's discretion. Every captain adds fuel. Turn the page. The vendor writes the ticket. That's ground handling. Turn the page, Frank. He turned it. Load sheet. Flight 783. April 14th, 2:41, 6. And beside it, in a column, a forensic accountant had built out of a subpoenaed delivery log at 4 in the morning, 237. 8. Decker stared at the 2 numbers. He said nothing. Because he was a pilot. Because he had been a pilot for 12 years, and there was no version of Frank Decker, however cornered, who could look at those 2 numbers side by side and not know instantly what they meant. 3.8 tons. In the computer, in the wing, in the sky. She reached across and turned the last page for him. Altitude deviation, approximately 900 feet. Captain advised FO that event was consistent with normal conditions. No report filed. Underneath unsigned as Halid Holloway, Dirk A. Clifford Pryor was reading upside down. He was very good at it. It was in a way the fundamental skill of his life. He reached the number. He reached the load sheet. He reached the words, "No report filed," and Clifford Pryor picked up his briefcase. "Cliff," Decker said, "I'm withdrawing as counsel." He was at the door already. He was not looking at his client. "You'll receive a letter. You said they always settle." Pryor stopped, and for one flicker, he looked back. "Frank, I take cases where my client said something stupid." He opened the door. "You people over the ocean with a lie in the computer." He left. Maya stood at the end of the table and looked at a man who was, for the first time in his adult life, alone in a room. She had written speeches in her head, in showers, on treadmills, at 3 in the morning in a hotel in Chicago. Every word of them was gone. "You thought I fired you for being a bigot," she said. Decker didn't look up, and that was enough. "You could have gone home. You could have taken the pension and moved to Florida, and nobody on this earth would ever have looked at anything else." She put a hand on the back of a chair. "But you sued me. You threatened my father's company. You told a lawyer you knew where the bodies were buried." She waited until he lifted his head. "So I went and looked under the hood. It was standard practice," he whispered. "No, everybody does it. We checked. 11,000 employees, 6 years of records. Every uplift ticket on every long haul in the system." She held his eyes. "Only you." The lead agent stepped forward. Gray at the temples, an ordinary face. "Frank Thomas Decker. You're under arrest for wire fraud, grand larceny, and reckless endangerment of an aircraft." He said it the way a man reads a grocery list. That's what nobody tells you. That the largest moment of a man's life gets read to him like a grocery list. "Stand up, hands behind your back." Decker didn't stand. He looked across the table at Maya, and what came out was not defiance. "I have a pension," nobody answered. 25 years. Eleanor took the pans. The agent's hand went gently under his arm. "I'm a captain," said Maya, looked at him, straight down the length of the table. "The way you look at weather, you're going to have to fly through." "You're a criminal," she said. He began to cry around the 16th floor. The agents had heard it before. They were kind about it. Maya stood at the window. Doyle came and stood beside her. Below, a ferry made the crossing to Staten Island. The way it does, 64 times a day, whether or not anybody 31 floors up is having the worst morning of their life. "Are you all right?" "Am I?" He nearly killed 8,000 people, and he sat in that chair and cried about a set of pans. "You wanted this." "No, so you said the word rope in a jet bridge in the rain. You knew what you meant. And now there's a rope, and you feel clean. Not happy, clean. The way a kitchen feels after you find the thing that was rotted behind the refrigerator and carry it out to the curb. It isn't joy, it's just air you can breathe." "Release the statement," Maya said. "All of it, the fuel, the load sheets." "Flight 783. Doyle went very still. "Maya, that tells this country our airplane nearly departed controlled flight over the Atlantic. Voluntarily. Before anyone's asked us a single question, yes. Our stock. Emmett." He stopped. 8,240 people got off an airplane at Heathrow. They went to their meetings. They hugged their children in an arrivals hall. She walked toward the door. "And they're alive because of luck. Not our procedures. Not our training. Luck." She stopped with her hand on the frame. "They get to know that. It isn't a public relations decision. It's the entire job." The stock dropped 19% in 4 days. Harold Fenwick called her at midnight. "You've cost this company $400 million. Yes." In 4 days, as yes. A long silence. "My wife watched your press conference. Doris has been married to me 48 years. She has never once said a word about a board I sit on." His voice did something. "She watched you tell this country our airplane almost fell out of the sky, and she said, 'Harold, that's a person who would tell me the truth about my own airplane.'" He cleared his throat. "I'm voting with you. From now on." on everything, and he hung up before she could answer. The union did not fight her. Ted Garner made a statement 4 days after the arrest, reading from an index card with shaking hands. This association exists to protect pilots. It does not exist to protect a man who falsified weight and balance data on 1/3 of crossings of the North Atlantic. He put the card down. Frank Decker isn't a pilot. I don't know what he is. And then he did a thing nobody on his executive board had approved. He took his glasses off. There were 11 complaints against this man, over 19 years. Every one of them died on somebody's desk. He put the glasses back on. Some of those desks were ours. 200 miles north, in a rented condominium with an ankle monitor under his sock, Frank Decker watched it on television and understood at last that nobody was coming. The case did not take years, because Decker had signed the tickets himself, because the fuel vendor's account manager, a man named Curtis Vaughn, who worked out of a business park in Houston and had been sleeping badly for 4 years, walked into a federal building with his own lawyer 11 days after the arrest and asked what he needed to do, because you cannot argue with a load sheet. Trial began 5 months later, in Brooklyn in the early spring. Derek Holloway testified on the second day, 32 years old, in a gray suit that didn't fit. A prosecutor walked him through the night of April 14th, minute by minute. And when they reached the moment the airplane came up light under his hands, the courtroom made a sound, not a gasp, something lower. The sound a room makes when it involuntarily imagines itself in seat 34B. Decker's attorney was a public defender by then. She asked the only question available to her. Why didn't you file a report? Because I was 29, ma'am. And he was seniority number 4. That's all? No, ma'am. He looked at the jury. A man in a crew lounge in Miami told me there was a filing cabinet. She paused. She had not expected that. What was in it? Derek Holloway looked at the 12 of them, one at a time, all the way down the row. Everybody who tried before me, guilty on every count. The jury was out 6 hours. Sentencing came 7 weeks later, a Tuesday in June. And it was there, in the part of a federal proceeding where the court hears from the people a crime has touched, that Sandra Holt stood up. She had not been reinstated. The ethics review was still open. A 45-year-old flight attendant with a pending review not get hired by another airline in this country, or any other. So she'd spent the winter working a register at a garden center in New Jersey, selling amaryllis bulbs to people who wanted something to bloom in January. She came to Brooklyn on her own money. She took a bus. She had been crew on 4 of the 31 flights. That was enough to let her stand up. Maya Caldwell sat in the 3rd row. Ray Kowalski sat in the 4th with a cane on his knees that he would use for the rest of his life, because he'd run through 2 terminals on a Tuesday morning in September, and something in his knee never came back. Your Honor, Sandra Holt said. Her voice went. She started again. I worked 23 trips with this man. I was on 4 of the flights in the indictment. I was in the back of that airplane with a cart, over the ocean, at night, serving coffee to people who thought somebody was looking after them. She put both hands on the lectern. I didn't know about the fuel. Nobody did. She looked up. But I knew what he was. I'd known for 6 years, and every time I decided not to write it down, I told myself the same sentence. Her chin came up. Watching isn't the same as doing. She turned her head. She looked directly at Frank Decker, who had been looking at the table in front of him for 11 days. It's the same, she said. She folded a paper she had never read from. That's all, Your Honor. I'm not asking the court for anything. I wanted him to hear it from somebody who was 6 feet away. She sat down. The judge spoke 4 minutes before she gave the number. She said the court had considered the defendant's age, his lack of prior record, his 34 years of service, the 11 character letters, 9 from relatives. And then she said this, and it went out live on every network in the country. Mr. Decker, this court is not sentencing you for what you said in a cockpit. She looked down at him over her glasses. What you said was contemptible. You would have walked off that airplane with your pension intact, and this country would have forgotten your name inside a year. She let it sit. This court is sentencing you because the contempt you felt for one pilot was precisely the contempt you for 8,240 passengers whose names you never learned and never intended to. She paused. You did not think they were real, in exactly the way you did not think she was real. Nothing moved in that room. You are not going to prison for hating her. You are going to prison because a man who cannot see the person in the seat beside him will, eventually and inevitably, stops seeing the people behind him. 11 years, federal, no parole. Eleanor did not come, his daughters did. They sat in the back row and did not speak to him, and the younger one cried the entire proceeding. Afterward, in the hallway, the older one, 31, an architect, a woman who had learned to ride a bicycle in a driveway in Greenwich with her father's hand on the seat, and then, one afternoon, not on it. She stood in front of him. She looked at him a long time. You did this in front of everybody, Dad. And she walked away down the marble hall, and her heels made a sound that Frank Decker would hear in his sleep for 9 years. He served 9 years and 4 months. He came out at 69 into a country that had mostly stopped caring and moved to a town in Pennsylvania he chose by putting his finger on a map, where nobody knew him for about 4 months. Then somebody did. Somebody always did. He worked at a hardware store on the main street. He was good at it. He knew what everything was for and where it went, and he could look at a hole in a piece of wood and tell a man which bolt he needed without measuring. He never flew again, not even as a passenger. He tried once in his second year out because his older daughter had a baby and had begun, carefully, in short sentences, over long silences, to answer his letters. He got as far as the jet bridge in Philadelphia. He stood in the mouth of it with the boarding pass in his hand while people flowed around him on both sides, and he looked down that ribbed metal tube at the open door of an airplane at the far end. And he could not do it. He turned around and drove 9 hours. He was 71 when a young woman came in looking for a hose fitting. 25, maybe. A child on her hip. She found it. She brought it to the register. And she looked at his face 1 second too long, and Frank Decker watched her recognize him and watched her decide not to say so. She paid. She put her wallet away. At the door, she stopped. My mom watched that video with me, she said. I was 14. He didn't answer. She made me watch the whole thing. The woman shifted the child to her other hip. She said, "Don't ever let anybody make you feel like that." She went out. The bell rang and stopped ringing. And Frank Decker stood in an aisle of washers and fittings in a town he had picked off a map, 71 years old, and understood, finally, all the way down, in a place where nothing can be argued with, that he had spent his whole life believing the uniform made him a man, and it had only ever made him visible. 10 months after that Tuesday in September, Maya Caldwell drove to Cherry Hill, New Jersey. She went alone. She wore jeans. Sandra Holt was as in the perennials, explaining to a customer the difference between two hostas that looked, to any reasonable person, identical. She glanced up. She nearly dropped the pot. "Ma'am, Sandra, 2 women in a garden center on a Saturday morning. One of them was worth $1.4 billion on paper. Both of them were thinking from about 6 feet of galley floor." The review closed, Maya said. She held out an envelope. "Failure to act. A formal reprimand in your permanent file. It'll be there the day you retire, and the day after that, in an archive forever." Sandra took it. She didn't open it. "And a job offer." Sandra looked up. "I don't want to be forgiven." "Good. I'm not offering that, and I'm offering you a job." Maya put her hands in her pockets. "One I can't do. Because I have 9 consultants and a training department, and every one of them wants to build me a module. A module with a video and a quiz." Maya's mouth twisted. "There's a certificate you can print." And Sandra Holt laughed. It surprised her. It came out sideways, like something breaking loose. "None of them has ever stood in a galley," Maya said. They walked the aisles, past the marigolds. Past a man arguing with his wife about a 50-foot hose versus a 75. It's called duty to speak. Every crew member, nobody's exempt. She paused. Including me. You'll teach me first, and I want you to make it hard. Sandra Holt stopped walking. She understood in the way people who've worked 22 years inside a hierarchy understand that there are questions you do not ask the person paying you. She asked it anyway. What did your father know? Maya kept walking 3 more steps, then stopped in front of a rack of seed packets promising things that would not happen for months. He signed off on 2 of them. Sandra didn't say anything. Not 11. 2. 2011 and 2014. His initials are on the closure memo. Emmett found them in March and sat on it 9 days before he brought it to me, because he had loved my father and didn't know what it would do to me. She turned around. So I've read those 2 memos maybe 400 times, and I've something, and I don't know if it's true, and I'll never know. What? That he didn't read them either. Sandra looked at her. That's the whole answer. He didn't hate anybody. He was the least cruel man I've ever known. He taught me to fly, he cried at parades. Her voice was very steady, and it cost her something. He was building. And a piece of paper came across a desk on a Thursday afternoon, and he moved his pen across it because a vice president trusted said it was handled. She put the seed packet back on the rack. And 19 years later, a man pointed at his daughter on an airplane. 2 aisles over. The couple settled on the 75-foot hose. That's what I'm going to say. In every one of those rooms. Because if I stand up there and pretend my family is clean, then it's just another module. With a video, Sandra said. And a quiz. Sandra caught up with her at the end of the aisle. What actually happens in it? It's you, standing in a room, telling me exactly what you told me in my doorway at 8:40 at night with rain on your coat. Sandra stopped. I'm not a speaker. Good. Ma'am, I'm a flight attendant. You were 6 feet away, Maya said. For 22 years, she turned to face her. There are 11,000 people at my company. I'd guess 9,000 of them are standing 6 feet away from something right now. They don't need a consultant with a slide deck. She spread her hands. They need somebody to walk into a room and say, I did it too. Here's what it cost. And here's the sentence I wish I'd said. Sandra Holt's eyes were wet. What sentence? Maya had thought about it for 10 months, in showers, on treadmills, at 3 in the morning in 11 hotels. Captain, I'm not comfortable with what you just said. That's it? 11 words. Maya started walking. It isn't brave. It won't get you fired. It won't stop a bad man on its own, and it isn't supposed to. She stopped at the door, in the heat coming off the parking lot. But it puts a witness in the room. She turned around. And a man like Frank Decker cannot operate in a room that has a witness in it. That's the whole trick. 19 years, and nobody ever said 11 words. Sandra Holt took the job. She was terrible at it for 2 months. She read from index cards. She cried in front of 60 ramp agents in Dallas and drove back to her hotel certain she'd humiliated herself. She called Maya from the parking lot. I can't do this. Then stop reading and say what? The true thing. You said it once, in a doorway, to a stranger who had every reason to hate you. Silence on the line. You crossed 6 feet that night. That's the hardest one you'll ever cross. Everything after that is a hallway. In the 3rd month in Denver, a 23-year-old first officer stayed behind after the room emptied. She waited until the last person was gone, and she said, Ma'am, there's a captain on my line, and she put her hands over her face. Sandra Holt stopped reading from index cards. She got very good, and Nia, the 24-year-old who'd said we didn't do anything in a forward galley, was reinstated after 9 months with a reprimand and 1 condition. The condition was that she complete Sandra Holt's course. She took it in Newark. 2nd row, arms folded, furious. She was still furious at the halfway point. She was not furious at the end. 9 layers later, she was teaching it herself, and the first thing she said in every session was always the same. When I was 24, I got fired for standing still. Then she'd let it sit for 3 full seconds. And it was the fairest thing that ever happened to me. 14 months after that, Tuesday in September, Meridian Airways operated an inaugural flight. Not to London, not to Tokyo or Paris or anywhere with a duty-free hall the size of a cathedral, to Atlanta, which made no sense whatsoever to the marketing department, who had prepared a lovely campaign around a new Pacific route, and were told, politely, that it would keep for a month, because in 1995, Robert Caldwell leased 2 Boeing 737s with money he did not have, and he flew the first revenue departure himself. Kennedy to Atlanta, 19 paying passengers, 2 of them his in-laws. He named the airplane Ruth after his mother. Maya was 7. She sat, row 1 with a coloring book she never opened, and she understood precisely none of it, except that her father was flying the airplane, and everything in the world smelled like new plastic and coffee. They painted Ruth on the nose of a 787, small, under the captain's side window. In the old typeface from a logo 4 people alive could still recognize. Maya did the walk around herself in the dark at 5:40 in the morning. She checked the pitot tubes, the static ports, the breakware indicators, and she put her hand flat on the cold the fuselage way, the way her father had taught her when she was 11, walking her around the wing of a rented Cessna with his hand on the back of her neck. Look it like it wants to kill you. And it's your job to talk it out of that. It was not raining. That was the thing she noticed. 14 months ago, on the worst professional morning of her life, the rain had come in sideways off the Atlantic and hit the tarmac hard enough to bounce. This morning there was nothing. Just cold air, and a black sky going gray at the eastern edge, and a runway with the lights burned steady all the way to the end of it. Derek Holloway was already in the right seat. He stood up when she came through the door, which she'd asked him 4 separate times not to do. "Sit down, Derek." "Ma'am, Maya." "Ma'am." She laughed and dropped into the left seat, and sat there a moment with her hands on her knees. "Because you never get used to it. 20,000 hours in, 40 years in, and you seat, and something in your chest goes very quiet. The left seat, where the blame lives." At 6:04, a woman appeared in the cockpit doorway. Sandra Holt was in uniform. She wasn't working the flight. She'd jump-seated up from Philadelphia the night before and was riding this leg in 4C like a passenger, and she'd come forward because she had asked permission and been given it. She stood in the doorway and looked at the 2 of them. "Ready and back," she said. "It's what a purser says." 4 words. It means nothing at all. She wasn't the purser. She said it anyway. And Maya understood exactly why, and so did Sandra, and neither of them said so. Because 14 months ago, Sandra Holt had stood in a doorway 6 feet from this cockpit with a coffee pot in her hand and said nothing. She was standing in a doorway again. She was saying something. "Thank you, Sandra." Sandra nodded. She looked at the overhead panel. All those switches. "I found her," she said. Maya turned around. "Amanda Reyes. She's flying cargo out of Louisville. She left the passenger side in 2019, a year after her last complaint." Derek Holloway looked up. "I called her in September. I sat in my car in a parking lot for 40 minutes first. She stopped. She's coming to Newark in January. She's going to speak to the class." "Sandra," she said. Sandra Holt stopped again. She was crying, and she was smiling, and it was 4 minutes past 6 in the morning. She said she never thought anybody would call. The auxiliary power unit hummed. Down on the ramp, a tug driver blew into his cupped hands. "Go sit down, Sandra," Maya said gently. "Yes, ma'am." And Sandra. She stopped in the doorway. 6 feet, Maya said. Sandra Holt smiled with her whole ruined 46-year-old face. 6 feet, she said, and she went aft. They pushed back at 6:30. They held short of runway 22R while Wadbada in another airline's colors rotated ahead of them and climbed into a sky going pink along the bottom edge. The tower cleared them onto the runway. And then, in the 90 seconds, while they lined up on the center line, Derek Holloway said something C had been holding for 14 months. "Ma'am, Maya." He looked straight ahead through the windscreen. "I've got a first officer now, on my line. 26. She's good. She's better than I was." 11,000 feet of concrete stretched away into the dark. Last she told me, a captain said something to her in Charlotte. Maya's hand rested on the thrust levers. "What did you do?" "Nothing," Derek said. He turned his head. She'd already handled it. She said 11 words to him in the cockpit before I even walked in. He looked back out the windscreen. She'd taken the class. Maya Caldwell sat in the left seat of a Boeing 787, named for a woman who died in 1988, on a runway her father had used 10,000 times. And she said nothing at all, because there was nothing to say. Because this is what it looks like. This is the whole thing. The entire point of every hard morning, and every sleepless night, and every dollar of 400 million. Not a courtroom. Not 11 years. Not a man in a hardware store in Pennsylvania. A 26-year-old woman in a cockpit in Charlotte. 11 words, and a captain who had to sit there and hear them. Meridian 100, cleared for takeoff, 22 right. Cleared for takeoff, 22 right, Meridian 100. Maya pushed the thrust levers forward. The center lights began to come faster, and then very fast, and then like tracer fire, and the airspeed came alive and rolled through 80 knots and 130. And at 152 knots, Derek Holloway said, "Rotate." And Maya Caldwell pulled. Ruth came off the runway at Kennedy on a cold, clear morning in November, climbed out over Jamaica Bay, and turned south. The sun came over the rim of the Atlantic at 3,000 feet. It filled the cockpit, filled it completely, came through the windscreen at a low, hard angle, and lit up every gauge and every switch, and both pilots and the flat gray water going out to the horizon. It had been up there the entire time. That's the thing about the sun. It doesn't rise. You just come around far enough to see it. Derek Holloway ran the after-takeoff checklist. Maya Caldwell leveled the wings, set the heading, reached up and turned off the seatbelt sign. And back in seat 4C, a 46-year-old woman who had spent 22 years being 6 feet away looked out a small oval window at the light coming up hard and gold over the water. She could have looked at anything. There was a magazine in the seat pocket. There were her own hands in her lap. She looked out the window, and she did not look down.